Science. It's supposed to promise progress, a better future for all of us. But what happens when that promise is built on a terrible lie? What happens when the search for knowledge just completely discards morality, and human beings are seen not as people, but as raw data? Today, we're going to journey into some of the darkest chapters of our modern history, where the lab coat became a cloak for truly unimaginable cruelty. Let that sink in for a moment. This was the chilling admission from the highest-ranking public health official in the United States. He was acknowledging that an experiment his own agency was funding was so unethical, so monstrous, that it had to be done somewhere else, hidden from the public, conducted on a population that just couldn't fight back. So, we're going to examine 5 historical events where this noble pursuit of scientific progress was twisted into a justification for cruelty that's honestly hard to fathom.
Every single one of these cases is a terrifying reminder that without a conscience, the tools we use for discovery, observation, experimentation, data collection can be turned to truly horrific ends. This is the story of what happens when scientists and doctors forget the most fundamental oath they take. First, do no harm.
Let's start in the United States with a study that's now become synonymous with medical betrayal. And this wasn't some brief lapse in judgment. No, this was a calculated, cold deception that went on for 4 decades.
For 40 long years, the U.S. Public Health Service ran what they officially called the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The subjects were 600 poor black sharecroppers, and they were chosen precisely because they were vulnerable, because they were a marginalized group. The most devastating date on this timeline, the one that turns this from a tragedy into an outright crime, is 1945. See, that's the year penicillin became the standard, widely available cure for syphilis. But for the men in this study, that cure was deliberately, actively withheld for another 27 years. Their suffering was just allowed to continue, all for the sake of data.
The deception. It was total. The 399 men who actually had syphilis were never even told what was wrong with them. They were told they had bad blood, a vague catch-all term. They were given fake treatments, placebos, and even subjected to painful spinal taps, which were pitched to them in letters as a last chance for special free treatment. The real goal was never to cure them. It was only to observe, right up to the very end, to their death and then their autopsy.
So what was the human cost? Well, this number, it doesn't even begin to tell the whole story, but it's a start. By the time the study was finally exposed, at least 28 men had died directly from syphilis. Another 100 died from related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 children had been born with congenital syphilis. This wasn't just neglect. This was a tragedy that spanned generations.
And if you think that's horrifying, our next case, it builds directly on the last one. If Tuskegee was a crime of omission, of withholding a cure, the experiments in Guatemala were a crime of commission. This time, American researchers didn't just watch a disease, they actively and deliberately spread it.
From 1946 to 1948, the very same U.S. Public Health Service, led by a Dr. John Cutler, who by the way was also involved in Tuskegee, conducted secret experiments down in Guatemala. And their subjects were, once again, some of society's most defenseless: soldiers, prisoners, orphans, and even patients in psychiatric hospitals.
The methods they used were just barbaric. Researchers paid prostitutes who were infected with syphilis to have sex with prisoners. When that didn't infect enough people quickly enough, they took a more direct approach. They would pour infectious bacteria onto scrapes they'd made on the men's faces, their arms, and their genitals. In some cases, they even injected it directly into their spines. And of course, none of the subjects ever gave any kind of informed consent.
In total, more than 1,300 people were intentionally infected with sexually transmitted diseases. Follow-up studies later found that by 1953, at least 83 of them were dead. This was the experiment that the U.S. Surgeon General admitted couldn't be done in his own country.
All right, for our third story, we're shifting gears a bit. We're moving from the realm of physical disease into the shadowy world of psychological warfare. This is the story of the CIA's top-secret illegal program to try and control the human mind. For 2 whole decades, right at the height of the Cold War, the CIA ran Project MKUltra. It was this huge, sprawling, illegal program of human experimentation. It involved dozens of institutions, universities, hospitals, even prisons. And the test subjects? They were often American and Canadian citizens who had absolutely no idea they were being used as human guinea pigs.
The agency tested this terrifying arsenal of techniques to see if they could actually break down a person's identity and control their behavior. Subjects, and we're talking about mental patients, prisoners, prostitutes, were secretly dosed with massive amounts of LSD. They were subjected to hypnosis, sensory deprivation, abuse, and all kinds of other psychological torture, all in the name of research.
So you have to ask yourself, why? Why would they do this? It was really all driven by Cold War paranoia. They were terrified that the Soviets, the Chinese, the North Koreans were already developing their own mind control techniques. So the CIA desperately wanted its own truth serum to use on spies, and they wanted to explore the dark possibility of creating a real-life Manchurian candidate, a programmable human agent.
In the end, the whole program was a complete failure. No magic truth serum was ever found. But in the process, countless lives were damaged, some destroyed, and it forces us to ask this really fundamental question.
We now have to turn to the Second World War, and to a program where human experimentation wasn't some secret side project. No, this was a full-blown industry of death, operating with the complete backing of a nation's military.
In occupied Manchuria, the Imperial Japanese Army operated a covert biological and chemical warfare research facility called Unit 731. The victims, who were mostly Chinese and Manchurian prisoners, were referred to by the researchers as Maruda. That means logs. That word alone tells you everything you need to know about the complete dehumanization at the heart of this project.
What happened inside Unit 731? It's almost beyond description. Prisoners were subjected to live vivisections without any anesthesia, just to study their organs. They were deliberately infected with plague, with anthrax, with cholera to develop biological weapons. They were tied to stakes and used as human targets for new kinds of bombs. They were literally frozen alive to study frostbite.
And yet, this is how they talked about it. This quote reveals the horrifying mindset. The researchers described their work in cold, clinical, scientific terms. To them, this wasn't murder. This was rigorous science. And the final, chilling twist? After the war, many of the lead scientists of Unit 731 were secretly granted immunity by the United States in exchange for the very data they had collected through torture.
And that brings us to our final case. The one that is, perhaps, the most infamous of all. In the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, science wasn't just perverted. It was fully integrated into an ideology of genocide. It became a tool for racial purity and total war.
In camps like Dachau and Auschwitz, Nazi doctors conducted a vast range of sadistic experiments. They froze prisoners to death to study hypothermia for their pilots. They locked people in low-pressure chambers to see how high their fighter pilots could fly before passing out. They performed brutal surgeries without anesthesia, and they sterilized thousands upon thousands in their sick quest to eliminate anyone they deemed unfit.
The world was justifiably horrified by these crimes, and it led to the doctors' trial at Nuremberg. Out of that trial came something called the Nuremberg Code, which is really a foundational document for all modern medical ethics. And its very first principle, its most important one, is a direct answer to every single horror we've just talked about. The voluntary, informed consent of the human subject is absolutely essential.
When you look back at all these cases, from Tuskegee all the way to Auschwitz, a pattern emerges, and it's a terrifying one. When people are reduced to subjects, when empathy is just discarded for the sake of data, when a researcher forgets the humanity of the person they're researching, science becomes a tool for pure evil.
And so, this is the question that these histories really leave us with. They aren't just stories from the past. They are warnings. Warnings for our future. A reminder that progress without principle, well, it isn't progress at all.